Hello everyone, I'm Megan Sullivan and welcome back to my Let's Play series for Hermes Rescue Mission right here on History and Games. Last time we talked about Hermes in the Bronze Age, and today we're going to talk about Hermes in the Dark Ages of Greece, so stay tuned for that. Alright, let's get started. And we're playing on hard mode. And we're going to start at level 13. Now, you notice that there are a couple stars here. This is actually my fourth time trying to record this episode. I haven't had much luck today. However, 4 is a lucky number because it is Hermes' number. So, fourth time's a charm. Here we go. And this worker says, the water of the lake where people were fishing was poisoned by the Lernaean Hydra. Lernaean, yes, I think that's right. It just decided to bathe there. How could they forget about the gifts for Poseidon? He could clean the water. Thank you for remembering me, Megara. Poseidon is at your service, Lord of the seas, oceans, rivers, and streams, God of storms and waves. All right, dirty water is no longer a problem. Poseidon, the king of underwater, is ready to accept your gifts. Okay, so our tasks are we have to restore the altar of Poseidon, clear the river, repair the way down to the water, and heal 6 citizens. So let's get started. And we're off to already a very quick start. Excellent. Quick is a key feature, speed being a really important feature to Hermes. And we love Hermes. We've been talking all about him on this Let's Play series. And last time we talked about Hermes in the Bronze Age, and like I said, we're going to talk about Hermes in the Dark Ages. Now, granted, that's a little bit tricky because the Dark Ages are called that for a reason. So the Dark Ages of Greece follow the collapse of the Bronze Age in Greece, or really around the Mediterranean, in the 12th century BCE. And after the collapse of the Bronze Age, which is a very sophisticated, advanced time in history around the Mediterranean, you have ancient Egypt, the Hittite Empire, several kingdoms in the Levant, and of course, you have these great palace complexes in Greece. And you have the Greek-speaking Mycenaeans, who Homer's heroes, or they're Homer's heroes, he calls them the Achaeans. And they're really important. And this was a very advanced time in civilization. But starting in the 12th century BCE, around 1177 BCE, everything starts falling apart. Now, why did it start falling apart, and how did that affect Hermes and the other gods of Greece? Well, what happened is actually up for debate. Nobody is totally sure why the Bronze Age collapsed the way it did. However, there are some clues that give us an idea of what might have contributed to these massive problems. And before I get to that, we're just going to move this vase here. All right, we need more food, so we're going to get this olive tree here. Speed everybody up a little bit. We're going to get some more food. All right, and we're going to go to the altar of Poseidon. We're going to fix that. We still need more food. We've got to get this bridge going, though. We can do it. We can absolutely do it. All right. We're making good time. We're making good progress. Still need some more food. We got to upgrade this. There we go. Now we can repair this bridge. Excellent. We got to get more food. Food is so very important. And that leads us back to the end of the Bronze Age. Recently, scientists have discovered evidence of a mega drought that occurred at the end of the Bronze Age. And that might have precipitated all sorts of problems. We know that during the late Bronze Age, there was a destructive force going around the Mediterranean, particularly Levant and Egypt, and they were raiding territories and burning everything down, basically, it seems like. And we call them the Sea Peoples today, but that's a modern term. The ancient Egyptians actually knew these different tribes by different names, but they were attacking parts of the Levant. They're attacking Egypt. Egypt barely managed to throw these people out. And in the meantime, and it's not clear if these are the same people, the great palaces of Mycenaean Greece were being burnt to the ground. We have evidence of all these major palaces being destroyed by fire. Nobody really knows exactly what went on here. But it does seem like there was a lot of destruction at the late Bronze Age period. And it was very scary. Now, of course, there's always been destruction in the world. So what prevented people from rebuilding, right? Like, earthquakes happen, fire happens, war happens, and people rebuild. They come back stronger than ever. But why didn't the people of, Bronze Age, why did the Bronze Age Mycenaeans, why did they not rebuild? Why did they not come back? Why did the Bronze Age collapse the way it did? And again, a major factor could have been a drought. Some scholars think also that this was a time when iron tools and weapons became more and more popular. The Bronze Age, of course, was named after bronze tools and weapons, but bronze is made out of copper and tin. And you could get copper on the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean. Tin was harder to come by. So bronze was very expensive, and it seems to have been in the hands of the elite, whereas iron seems to have been more common. And it was about this time that iron weapons like longswords may have started appearing. So when there were external stressors like drought or other natural disasters happening in the Bronze Age, it's possible that societies with a lot of iron armor started taking advantage of this. And that could have also precipitated a lot of the fighting that happened during this time period, because we know that the Hittite Empire fell at the end of the Bronze Age. Egypt barely clung on. And all of Homer's heroes, the Achaeans, whom the Hittite records call the Ahiyawa, they fell too, right? And nobody ever decided to rebuild. So it was a time of upheaval, and the immediate post years of the Bronze Age, right, were, kind of in turmoil as people were migrating all over the place, either peacefully or not so peacefully. And it was pretty. Oh, there she is. I was trying to heal one more person. Go, Apollo, go. It was pretty intense. And that level was pretty intense, but we did it. We did a good job. All right, we got a star for it too. 6 minutes, 38 seconds. Best time 5 minutes, 31 seconds. Okay. So a number of factors were actually probably the cause of the collapse of the Bronze Age. And if there's something like drought, that could explain the massive drop in population that followed the immediate collapse of the Bronze Age. There are parts of the Peloponnese in southern Greece where like up to 90% of the population just up and abandoned their homes, which is very unusual. And the reason we don't know a lot about the following, 3 or 4 centuries is because the writing system on mainland Greece, if we're talking about Greece specifically, it was lost. Linear B was a complex writing system, and it was used primarily by scholars working for these vast palace complexes, and they're working for kings, and these different kings basically and chieftains fell out of power, and the art of writing was lost for almost 400 years in Greece until Greece started making contact with the outside world again on a regular basis, and they ended up learning about the Phoenician alphabet and adopting it and adding vowels to it to create the ancient Greek alphabet sometime in the 8th century BCE, which is very cool. I do want to point out, though, that it's not like the Bronze Age totally stopped everything, right? Most of Greece was very affected by it, but there were a couple of places that sort of still kept doing some sort of trade and being somewhat successful. So there's an island off the coast of Athens called Evia, and an ancient site on that island called Lefkandi seemed to do okay in the immediate post-Bronze Age years. Scholars and archaeologists have found treasure and an elaborate burial site at the ancient site of Lefkandi that sort of says that, people didn't just stop what they were doing and freeze in place for hundreds of years. There was still some progress, and not just in terms of trade still existing in some form or another, but we're going to talk about the beautiful art style that came out of the Dark Ages, which was geometric, leading to the term geometric period. But first, let's play level 14. All right, Red Willow. Local shrine saving people from the scorching sun. Drive away the wolf pack from the grove, deal with 4 giant crabs, save citizens, and repair the road to the Red Willow. Okay. We're going to go ahead and do that. Yay. Look at this pile of stones. A perfect representation of Hermes in his original form. People in the Bronze Age may have worshipped Hermes as a pile of stones, waymarkers, when traveling. And we talked about that in the last episode, where people worshipped perhaps a form of Pan Hermes. Pan means something like protector. And these waymarkers were sort of a symbol of the god's power to protect those who were traveling back and forth, physically between places or spiritually between the upper air and the lower air. So Hermes, from the very beginning, he may have come from a Vedic god, some sort of Proto-Indo-European god who protected shepherds who guided people, travelers, shepherds, merchants. He could guide the living to wherever they needed to go, but also could guide the dead as well. So he was very important. He was a very important liminal deity from the very beginning, and people would worship, would stop and pay tribute to him at waymarkers. And we see those waymarkers here with these stones. And it's really nice. And at the end of the Bronze Age, unfortunately, because writing is lost at this point during the Dark Ages, we don't know specifically how the Greeks continued to worship their gods. We know that we do, or that they do, because linear bead tablets have the name of the Greek, most of the Greek pantheon preserved on these clay tablets. So there must have been some continuity in worship, and we do seem to have some archaeological evidence of outdoor shrines and outdoor altars. So of course, life went on. But things sort of went back to a more simple way of life, and that was expressed in the beautiful pottery of the Dark Ages, known as geometric pottery, where people would design pottery with geometric shapes, meandering keys, sometimes spirals, different sort of lines. And these geometric, which seem like very simple patterns, would turn into more and more elaborate patterns as the decades and centuries went on. And from these geometric shapes was a specific style of animal that came out. So you would see deer and birds emerging from these beautiful geometric shapes. And then you would have eventually humans. These humans were they look like very elaborate stick figures, but it was a very specific style. And it's here where we can start to see what looks like visual representations of the more popular oral tales that were going about that probably led to the Iliad and the Odyssey. So it's really, really neat. And I'm sorry, I'm very distracted telling you this story and being like, you know what? I don't have any money and I really need to put a bank here. I'm so sorry. I got so into talking about geometric pottery because it's actually really quite beautiful. I think it's underestimated by people sometimes because on the surface it looks beautiful, but it can be very expressive. as can the votive offerings of this time. And so people are finding new ways to express themselves. And by the time the late geometric period, you start seeing visual representations, elaborate ones, of what looks to be key scenes from the Odyssey, particularly the funerary games of either Patroclus or Achilles. And it's quite stunning. But we don't have a lot of images that we can for sure tell of the gods, right? It seems like we have the more heroic tales of the Iliad and the Odyssey, but it's hard to say, which figures are gods, or if we can recognize them as gods because there's no writing. For some of these gods, we can't say for certainty who they are. But we do know that obviously, once Greece comes out of the Dark Ages, that the Greek gods continue on and in a much more, I want to say almost unified form, which isn't quite right. There was still a lot of local worship and local customs. Each city-state would end up having their own personal epithets for the gods. But because of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, it felt like for the first time the Hellenes had written down something that's akin to a national narrative, which is very interesting. All right, what do I need? I think I need more gold, so we're gonna make a bank. All right, here we go. Yes. Get some cheese. All right. All right, good job, Aries. All right, I think we're ready to light up this torch, and we should be able to get rid of the wolves, and then we can finally repair this, and we can get to the willow tree, which is very pretty. All right, here we go. There we go. There we go. Yeah, go Hermes. Excellent. All right, can we repair this? Not quite yet. Not quite yet. We're almost there. Sorry guys, this level is a bit rough. I just got so excited talking about geometric pottery. Something else that was probably still going on in the Dark Ages as well was hero worship. Especially after the Iliad and the Odyssey, people were anxious to say that they had the bones of a hero, which acted as a guardian to their city-state. So their past was very important. It does seem that the ancient Greeks had dim memories of the collapse of the Bronze Age that was preserved in their stories. And some scholars think that maybe that's what the Iliad and Odyssey are all about. That, when the Greeks invade Troy, it's one of the times that these marauding pirates were going around attacking different coastal cities and kingdoms. And I sort of wanted to circle back to that because we talked about the Sea Peoples and how this group were, sort of terrorizing the Levant, terrorizing Egypt. There's an interesting little fact, though, that I think you guys might like to know about, which is when the quote-unquote Sea Peoples attacked Egypt, I believe it was the pharaoh Ramesses who defeated them, but he settled one particular group in the Levant, possibly at garrisons around the Levant that Egypt wanted to control. And these people apparently had real military prowess. They were very warlike. And you might know them as the Philistines. And so a gravesite around the territory that the Philistines controlled in the Levant was was excavated by archaeologists, and these archaeologists did DNA samples of the bodies found there and found that the DNA between a particular period in the very late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, there was a spike of people with DNA from the Mediterranean, possibly around mainland Greece. And there's also a lot of archaeological evidence with pottery that looks very Mycenaean. So scientists think that the Philistines of the Bible may actually be initially from parts of Greece or territory controlled by Greek-speaking people, which is very interesting. And although Homer's particular Trojan War probably didn't happen, we know that since the 1400s BCE, the Ahiyawa, which is what the Hittites call possibly Homer's Achaeans, were clashing with the Trojans. Not necessarily because the two sides had a personal beef, but rather the Trojans were possibly part of Hittite territory, and the Hittites were fighting against rebels known as the mysterious Luwites. And the Luwites decided to make allies of the Achaeans, the Ahiyawa, and a lot of those fights took place on the fields around ancient Troy. So again, Homer could have very dim memories of these late Bronze Age clashes, and perhaps once the Bronze Age systems collapse began around 1177 BCE, it's possible that these Ahiyawa attacked Troy again. Perhaps there's a dim memory of that, and we know that some of the names from the Iliad and the Odyssey are preserved in Linear B tablets in previous centuries from the Bronze Age. So the name Achilles appears twice. In Linear B tablets, one in Pylos in the southern part of the Peloponnese in Greece, and then once on a Linear B tablet on Crete. And we also know that one of the rulers of Troy, which was called Ilusa, like the Iliad, one of the names of the leaders was Alexandru, the Hittite transliteration of the name Alexandros, which is one of the two names given to the younger prince of Troy, Paris, in the Iliad. So it's kind of exciting that we actually have archaeological evidence that Homer isn't completely making this up. There's archaeological evidence that there were wars and battles around the Trojan plain. We know these names, some of them existed, and there was some sort of clash, as recorded by the Hittites, between the Greeks and the Trojans, even if they're not directly beefing, which I find very interesting. Okay, on that note, let's play level 15. Word of mouth. Strengthen the faith in the gods by helping the shepherd, and the whole country will know about it. We're going to drive away the satyrs, restore the temple of Hector. Wait, what? We just talked about the Iliad and the Odyssey. Hector's on the other side. Also, a name like Hector does appear in Linear B tablets, but there's some debate as to whether it's the name of someone important or like the name of a servant. It's not totally clear. Also, clear the way for the shepherd, remove all obstacles. We know that Hermes protects shepherds. That's one of his jobs, is to protect those who are constantly traveling back and forth. And so shepherds follow their flocks back and forth between like the valleys and the mountains and hills. Drive away satyrs, that's a little interesting because in archaic and classical Greek mythology, the ultimate satyr, the nature god Pan, from which Hermes may have come from, is a satyr. He has goat legs and he is a part goat deity. So that's very interesting. We're driving them away. Technically, if we go by Greek mythology, we should help the satyrs and they should be helping us. But at any rate, we're going to go ahead and get started. There we go. Restore the temple of Hector. That is so funny to me. Hector's a cool name, by the way. That's really neither here nor there, but I just thought I would share how cool of a name that is in English. It sounds very cool in English. Here's another little fun fact from the late Bronze Age. There is one Hittite, I think it's a letter from a Hittite king. I'll have to check this. But he's trying to make a pact with an ally. And it might be with a king or leader from Velusa, so Troy. And one of the gods mentioned possibly on the Trojan side or the Luwite side. I'm not sure. I can't remember off the top of my head who the Hittites are trying to make a pact with. But one of the gods mentioned, the name sounds an awful lot like Apollo. And in the Iliad, Apollo is the patron god of Troy. And the Iliad really kicks off with the Greek side dying of a plague sent by Apollo because King Agamemnon, being a big jerk, refuses to give back the daughter of a priest of Apollo at Troy. So that priest prays to Apollo, and Apollo sends a plague to the Greeks. And the only way to stop the plague is to give back the daughter of the priest of Apollo. Of course, Agamemnon, being a big jerk, is like, nah, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to let everyone die. And the Iliad actually starts off with Achilles being, believe it or not, reasonable and asking Agamemnon, you know, can you please give this girl back? We'll give you all sorts of gifts worthy of a king, but you got to do something about this plague. And Agamemnon is just being a jerk and making the whole army suffer because he's selfish. And he's like, no, I love this priestess girl whom I don't know and who probably doesn't want to be here, but I'm a king and I have the right to hold her captive. And long story short, he gets into a huge fight with Achilles. And Agamemnon is like, well, if I have to give back this priestess, I'll take your slave girl instead, Achilles. And instead of Achilles being like, fine, whatever, let's just do this, Achilles' pride is now hurt. And Achilles throws a temper tantrum and goes and pouts in his tent for nearly 20 chapters of the Iliad. And he only comes out to fight, spoiler alert, after Patroclus, his closest friend, dies in battle. And then Achilles goes on a killing rampage and he kills Hector. But instead of that being the end of it, he just, he totally desecrates Hector's body, which is literal anathema, an offense to the gods. And he only regains his humanity after Hermes, on the orders of Zeus, guides King Priam of Troy safely through the Greek camp so that King Priam can ask for his son's body back to make sure his son has an honorable burial and that his ghost doesn't wander the earth forever. And it's at that point Achilles, thinking of his own father, and Achilles knowing oh my gosh, what do I need to do? I need a forge. Okay. I was like, what is the holdup here? I do not have a forge. That is on me. Sorry, guys. I was telling this story and I got completely caught up. But what happens is, hold on. Just making sure I'm not missing anything else. But Priam doesn't want his son's ghost to be wandering around forever. And he needs a proper burial to do that. And this kind of appealed to the archaic Greeks. They were very superstitious about ghosts. If you did not receive a proper burial, then your ghost would wander around. And that ghost could terrorize an entire society and start killing innocent people in that society. So you had to square away the pollution of the dead, make sure people were properly buried. You had to cleanse yourself if you murdered somebody. There are all sorts of rules when dealing with the dead and dealing with ritual pollution. And, Achilles does a really bad thing when he drags Hector's body around Troy, right? He's behaving badly. And it's only when he realizes that he's also received a prophecy. His mother, who's prophetic, the goddess Thetis, tells him, if you go home, if you leave Troy, you'll be an old man and, you'll die of old age, but you won't be remembered for anything glorious. If you die young, they'll literally sing songs about you for the next 3,000 plus years. So Achilles decides to stay, but he knows he's going to die. And he realizes when he's talking to Priam that his own dad is going to suffer because, Achilles is going to... where is that? There it is. Achilles is going to die and make his own father sad. And when he realizes that there's some commonality between him, Priam, or Priam's experience and his own dad's experience, he finally lets go of his anger and he agrees to give Hector's body back and allow something between 11 and 14 days for Hector to have funeral games, right? So it's the whole Iliad is the rise, fall, and redemption of Achilles. And Achilles, to a modern audience, is very hard to like. He's really just kind of the worst in a lot of ways. But when you remember that the Iliad doesn't end where you think it does with the Trojan horse trick, it really is just focused on Achilles going from a way better king than Agamemnon to going in despair and being kind of a terrible person to redeeming his nobility and his kingship. At least that's how I interpret it. Right. But the whole thing about the Trojan War isn't really glorious if you sit there and you read the Iliad. It's pretty violent. Nobody really wins. And the Odyssey and other parts of this giant epic cycle make clear that although the heroes, quote unquote, the Greeks, the Achaeans, win the day, they don't really win the war. It's not long after the Iliad and the Odyssey where all their houses fall. Agamemnon is killed by his wife when he gets home. A lot of people are forced to wander, including Odysseus, for a decade. Most of his crew drowns on the way home. Even as some people make it back as heroes, they eventually get killed too. A lot of the heroes that you read about, Theseus and, Odysseus, even Odysseus, eventually a later tradition has him killed by his own son, by the sorceress Circe or Kirke. So it's, why do all these heroes come to a tragic end? And some think maybe it's because the Greeks were trying to explain the fall of these great houses, these great little kingdoms that they know existed at one point, but don't exist in their time. They only see the ruins of it, and they still have these dim stories. And one of the oldest stories is actually the fall of Thebes, which is a little further north in Greece. And so that actually takes place before the Trojan War. So there seems to be some memory of something happening to the Bronze Age little kingdom of Thebes. So it's really, really interesting, right? And the Iron Age preserves all of that as oral tradition. And then starting in the 8th century BCE, when writing is introduced back into Greece via the Phoenicians, they can start writing down these traditions. And they're literally quite epic. And they're important because although they're not factual, they're not historical the way a Thucydides or Herodotus or a Xenophon or anyone like that is, they're informative about what potentially happened. And some archaeology really backs it up. So it's very cool. But what happened to Hermes? Let's talk about this for level 16. So top tricks. Split personality may be helpful sometimes. Additional worker is always useful. Okay. Look at this little head. How cute is that? All right. The gods sent you another bonus. Collect it and get an additional worker for some time. All right. Where is Hermes on the map? We need to find his little tent. Oh, here he is. He's right there. Okay, we've got a lot to clear out. So do we have any evidence of how people worship the Greek gods during the Dark Ages? And I think I mentioned this before, but not really. We don't have any writing. The pottery and grave goods that survive aren't overtly specific about which gods are worshipped and how and why. There is a little bit of intriguing evidence from the island of Crete, where a Bronze Age cult that was later associated with Hermes and Aphrodite pretty much continued through the Dark Ages. There does seem to be, if I'm understanding this evidence correctly, some evidence of maybe destruction or buildings being torn down or destroyed, but then parts of the temple being built up later. And so this major shrine to Hermes and Aphrodite was in some sort of continuous use from the Bronze Age all the way until late antiquity, I believe. So it was a very popular shrine. And I love it's to Aphrodite and Hermes. I love them both so much. It's really great. But our first real visual representation of Hermes as somebody we recognize in art really doesn't happen into the very, very early archaic period. So I would say the late 7th, early 6th century BCE. I wasn't really able to find that much from before because, of course, the geometric period lasted a few hundred years, or at least a couple hundred years, right? And you have these geometric shapes, and then you have these animals I talked about that form out of these geometric shapes, and then you finally have people being represented. And not just in pottery. There are some intriguing figurines from the late geometric period and early archaic period. There's one of a man, possibly a hero, attacking a centaur, which is kind of wild. And some of the early figurines seem to feature centaurs, which is very interesting. And so the question is that man like Hercules fighting Nessus, at the river? There's a, famous legend of Hercules fighting a centaur in Greek mythology. And it could be that's what's being displayed, but we don't know because writing isn't either there or very common at that point. So we have to do our best guess. But that is the interesting thing about the Dark Ages, is it's fun to speculate. And I really like it. And I really like Hermes. He's just here chilling. Just waiting. All right. We've got this. All right, I'm going to pick this up. Get all the food. Traders may not only have rare items, but resources as well. Buy weapons from the trader in exchange for gold. Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah. Let's get some weapons going. Let's get everyone literally up to speed here. What's that? Okay, food. Food is always good. Money is always good. Okay. There we go. More food. More stuff. All right, I can. Okay. I can now restore the School of Apollo. Apollo, of course, was a god of healing, but there was a duality to the Greek gods. So although Apollo could absolutely heal people, he could also send plague, which brings us full circle back to the beginning of the Iliad, which is exactly what he does when the Greeks go too far and they, and Agamemnon kidnaps the daughter of a priest of Apollo. And that's just too much for Apollo. And he's like, nope, you're not disrespecting me. You're not disrespecting my people like that. And in fact, there is an epic showdown between Apollo and Achilles at the end of the Iliad. Not exactly a showdown, because, Apollo knows, being prophetic, he'll get the last laugh on Achilles. He, via Paris/Alexandros, will be the one to bring down Achilles via an arrow. And of course, Apollo, throughout his history with Greece, is known as the far shooter. He is known to be an excellent, the best archer. So it's only fitting that Achilles be brought down by Paris, who I believe his arrow may have been guided by Apollo. So, spoiler alert, Achilles does not get out of this unscathed. Odysseus, the person who comes up with the plan of the Trojan horse, which allows the Greeks to sneak into Troy and sack it by pretending it is an offering to, I believe it's Poseidon, so that they can journey home. And of course, the Trojan horse is not enough armor. I gotta get armor. Keep forgetting to get armor. The Trojan horse is empty, and the Greeks pile in. And the Trojans take it as a trophy because they think it's a sacrifice to a god for a safe journey home because the Greeks are totally gone. But no, they're not. They sack the city through sneaky means, and they enslave the women and children and kill some of the children, famously Hector's son among them. And then they all have to go home. But the Greeks don't have a overly happy homecoming, as I mentioned. So Odysseus, for example, spends basically almost 10 years wandering the Mediterranean, which if you would stop picking fights with Poseidon, maybe that wouldn't have happened. But of course, the Odyssey is a whole story about knowledge and homecoming and stuff like that. But again, there are these elaborate stories of migration and wandering, and does it have to do anything with the immediate events that kick off the Dark Age and end the Bronze Age? We don't know for sure, and I cannot find this citizen. There they are. Oh, wow, they're way over here. What do I need? I need more of this.
It's this.
And I still need to eliminate the drought. That's what happens when you get all excited about talking about Greek history and folklore and mythology and all that good stuff. No regrets. We're not going to get a star for this, but I don't care. We've been having so much fun talking. But although the Mycenaeans fell, new people could begin to emerge and have a say. And in the end, as people emerge from the Dark Age, as they emerge from a mega drought, as they make contact with each other again, a new age would emerge that was super creative, super advanced. And it is the first time we really see Hermes in action, being heroic, being a giant slayer, being a guide, being a messenger, being a fun-loving, chill, cool god who just wants to help. And we're going to talk about that extensively in the next episode. School of Apollo. Okay, what do we need though? We need one more of these. Okay, obviously I did not click on that, so I was gonna say I thought I clicked on that and nope. There we go. We're gonna end this drought, which is a perfect summation of how the Dark Ages ended. When the mega drought ended, people started settling down, people started contacting each other again and exchanging ideas. And who was there to guide them? It absolutely was Hermes. And we're going to talk about I deserve stars. I deserve stars. 9 minutes and 22 seconds. Okay, maybe I didn't deserve stars. But you guys are superstars. You guys rock. And we're going to talk about Hermes. It keeps getting harder. Hades sent more and more misfortunes to Greece. But don't worry, we're going to stop them. We're going to fight back, and we're going to emerge in the light with the archaic period of Greece. Thank you for helping me. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk about archaic Greece and more Hermes in the next episode.